Hello, welcome back. This time I will be reading Lady of the Stars, Stevie Nicks by Edward Winsenson. And it's not particularly Halloweenish, but autumn always feels like the best time for Stevie. Introduction. As long as I can play a song and people are still sitting there by the end of it, I won't worry about my music losing value. Thus, Stevie Nicks answered the critics in People magazine, June 13th, 1994, concerning the question if she was out of date with the current music trends upon the release of her new album, Street Angel. Some of the critics can be biting indeed. As the Daily News writer Glenn Kenny wrote July 17, 1994, if there is any analog to Sunset Boulevard's Norma Desmond in rock, it must be Stevie Nicks. Imagine Stevie roaming through her mansion, swaddled in frilly fabric, believing that the world outside is still held in thrall by the Maxfield Parrish-tinted visions of the glazed-eyed doe this middle-aged woman no longer is. Her latest solo album, Street Angel, is the oral equivalent to that clueless, anachronistic script Desmond sends to Cecil B. DeMille in one of Sunset's wrenching embarrassments. Is Stevie Nicks caught up in her own delusions and crystal visions? She has stated that she is not concerned if her music does not reflect the popular fads going today. And I would agree that music is music, no matter what time period it is. Consider Elvis Presley. His music will continue to be heard down through the years. Of course, Stevie's answer may not reflect the current marketplace in today's world of hip-hop, rap, heavy metal, or alternative. Time will tell how well Street Angel will sell, and perhaps reflect how strong her following still is. Music critics should not be fooled. Stevie Nicks still has a very large, loyal following. I will get into my own personal observations of Street Angel later in this book. For readers who are aware of my first book on Stevie, entitled Stevie Nicks, Rock's Mystical Lady, the question may arise on why a second book. The answer is that she is a fascinating subject, and much could be devoted to her as a subject. Another answer is that I wanted to bring the story up to date with the release of her long-awaited new album, and that I had more things to say that I didn't get to on the first book. There are more answers also that I will just keep quiet about, keep a mystique about it, as Stevie is so good at doing. I did want to approach this book in a little different kind of slant, a more personal journalistic style, to be able to share some of my own personal experiences about my pitfalls and problems that I encountered as I researched and worked on the first book. All reading material must be evaluated with a discerning mind because the writer may be tinting the material, not only with their own views and slant, but sometimes even with more sinister motives in mind. This book, as my first one on Stevie Nicks was, is not a gossip or tell-all book. It could have been, but that is not my purpose here. I want to present Stevie Nicks as the artist, this time being more objective and presenting some of both the positive and negative that I have observed. The reader needs to read it with that discerning mind. I continue to be a fan of Stevie Nicks and her music. In my eyes, she is a poet, a dreamer, and a gifted songwriter who can cast spells with her music. Her music has touched many people and given them hope, and in some instances, miracles. I have letters from readers of my first book who have shared such stories. Is her music relevant for today? Will it hold up and endure into the future when we are gone from this planet? Will Stevie's music be, as some of the great poets' works, enduring down through time, her music being a document of popular culture and a voice from this time? Perhaps the dreamers and poets of today can answer that. I cannot. As she says in her song Destiny from Street Angel, my destiny is fighting again, secretly unwinding what it was that I was supposed to say to you today. Stevie Nicks, poet. I'll never run myself into the ground again, because I don't think it's fair to my spirit or my body or the people that love my music or my family or anybody else to kill myself over this. Someday I think I'd rather sit in a rocking chair and write songs, and maybe even go to the Roxy and sing them and put them on a record. And how far off is that time? I'd say probably about 4 years. That quote by Stevie Nicks was made to the Arizona Republic newspaper writer Andrew Means in December 5th, 1981. Well, Stevie Nicks is still doing her music today. As of this writing, she just released her latest solo album, Street Angel. However, it seems that Stevie has always had a realistic look at how long she can keep performing in public. It does seem that she will always be writing songs, though, from her comments of past and present. The magazine High Times asked her in March of 1982 about it. You've said that in middle age you'd like to be on top of a mountain with a piano and a typewriter. Nicks, I would. I look forward to that. I love my performing, and I'll do that for another 5 or 6 years, but there will be a point in my life when what I'll really want to do is go away and write, and I'll write about all of this. I've already written thousands of pages. The story is written already. I'll want to add to it, and I want to put it together, and it'll be an incredible book. In BAM magazine, September 11, 1981, she stated similar things concerning songwriting and performing in connection to her Belladonna album. I'm far too intelligent to not know that there will be a time when I won't be 33 anymore. When I won't be that pretty anymore, I won't be sparkly anymore, and I'll be tired. I want to be able to know that I can still have fun and be a part of the world, and that I didn't give it all away for Fleetwood Mac. That's what Belladonna is all about. That's the beginning of my life. The story began around 1991 when I was considering doing a book on Stevie Nicks. Eventually, after many setbacks and much work, we were able to complete the first book, Stevie Nicks, Rock's Mystical Lady, in 1993. One of the key people who was involved with the book project was a woman by the name of Jean Inlow. I got acquainted with Jean through a fan publication she was doing entitled Platform, based on the type of shoes Stevie wears. Jean had connections to Stevie, and I had had no success up to that point in time dealing with Stevie's management about the book. Jean and I continued to correspond and talk on the telephone about my idea for the book. I eventually went out to Los Angeles to work with Jean for 2 weeks in January of 1993. Jean was an incredible archivist of Stevie materials and an avid collector. She was sought out by people doing any kind of projects on Fleetwood Mac or Stevie for her knowledge and expertise. I learned of Jean's involvement with some of Stevie's family, especially of her friendship with Stevie's mother, Barbara. Jean and Barbara would talk on the phone 3 to 4 times a week or more. They also shared a common concern, having heart conditions. Of course, Jean was a devout follower of Stevie and had had numerous meetings with Stevie. One thing that was interesting was that Stevie had asked Jean if she would cease publication of Platform. In a letter from Jenny, the person who answers Stevie's fan mail, she states how there are numerous unauthorized fan magazines out there, that only Stevie and her brother are authorized to do such publications. Jean did stop the publication of Platform due to her devotion to Stevie and wanting to always stay on the good side of her, but I knew that Jean was so sad about having to do this. Then Jean would also do errands for Stevie, such as get esoteric books for Stevie from the New Age bookstore called the Bodhi Tree Bookstore. Stevie would always want to give certain books out to friends and would buy numerous copies of a certain title. I learned through my time with Jean that Stevie helped put a certain relative by marriage through a drug and alcohol rehab program, paying for all the costs herself. Jean would also babysit the children of one of Stevie's cousins who had embraced Buddhist teaching. I met him on 2 occasions at Jean's Los Angeles apartment. One of my chief aims was to try to get Stevie's involvement with the book, but I finally received the definite no on one of the last days I was working with Jean. I had gone to Los Angeles with a business partner, and we had asked Jean if she would ask Stevie's mother if the 2 of us could stop at their home in Scottsdale, Arizona, Stevie's parents' home, to talk about the book. This was after many unsuccessful attempts to have Stevie's former management help out with the book. Jean received a phone call from Barbara Nicks telling her that the answer was no for our visit. The word had come from Stevie's personal assistant via her management. One of the objections to my request for help on the book, either from Stevie's management or from Stevie, was that why should Stevie help you on a book when she is working on her own? According to the press release materials from Modern and Atlantic Records, in connection to Stevie's Street Angel album, it says that she, Stevie, is in the process of putting together a book entitled Dreams, Stories, and Poems. Culled largely from the journals she's kept over the years, aside from her writings, it will also include some of her drawings and photographs. I've heard and read in interviews about this book that is supposed to come out for more than 5 or 6 years now. If the book does come out, it will surely be a big treat for all of her fans, including myself. In Hit Parader magazine, September 1983, writers Stan Hyman and Vicki Greenleaf in their article Stevie Nicks' Magic Touch stated, "Also in the works for Stevie Nicks is a book, a diary of sorts. It will include hand-painted photographs. A friend of Nicks is reproducing the print and calligraphy on parchment paper. I just write a page every night," Nicks said. "You wouldn't believe the thousands of pages of stuff that I have. I just jot down what's happening. I'll get to say everything I ever wanted to say," she said, laughing. "So I'm real excited. The book people told me, you don't have to sing anymore if you don't want to. You can just stop and write books. I've never seen that book come out." Then, in the Music Connection magazine, the January 1989 issue, writer Laura Gross, in an article entitled Fleetwood Mac's Leading Ladies, Stevie Nicks and Christine McVie, asked, "Does that mean we'll never see your poetry published?" Stevie Nicks: "I'm trying. I'm working on it. I really am. It's been so busy for the last year. I still write, but I don't want to go back and edit it. I just want to keep writing. I have about 150 drawings that I've done in the last 5 years, but I don't like to finish them. I just like I don't like to finish books. And I really don't even like to finish songs because then they're done and then they're handed over to somebody else. As long as they're not quite finished, whether it's a song or a painting or anything, it's still mine. So I guess that fans will have to wait and see if this book that Modern and Atlantic is talking about dreams, stories, and poems will indeed materialize. In my first book, I related how Stevie's songwriting inspiration sometimes comes from reading her favorite writers and poets. I had quoted from Jenny Boyd's book, Musicians in Tune. Sometimes I'll get out of bed in the middle of night and go into my office and put the paper in the typewriter and get out my books that are inspirational to me. Oscar Wilde, Keats, Canadian poets, European poets. And I'll just open a page and read something and I'll say, okay, this is my information for today. This is what is supposed to come through me today. And I'll close the book so I'll never be able to find that page again. And I'll think about it for a while and then I'll probably write for 1 or 2 hours and then I'll be able to go back to bed. Again, in Andrew Mean's Arizona Republic newspaper article of December 5th, 1981, it reads, "She describes her writing style as journalistic. I write at night in prose," she said. "I write what's happening in my life down in somewhat of a formal prose way, and then I go back and put anything that I think is important into rhyme." Many times it appears in her songs that the characters may be herself, as she referred to this part of her songwriting in an article entitled Through the Glass Darkly, written by Sylvie Simmons for Revolution magazine, November 1989. Stevie bears this out concerning her Other Side of the Mirror album. "I love making up little fantasy things," Stevie says. "All the characters in my songs, the Sarahs on this album, Alice and Juliet, they're all me. But they're all different sides of me. It's a great way to write about what's going on in your life without telling it in a real serious way, but the point comes over and I think people understand that." Also in this same article concerning songwriting, Stevie gave this interesting observation about herself. "They may think of me as a certain image. Well, she's kind of airy-fairy, and she probably flies around her house in black chiffon," Stevie bristles, which is all not really very true. But on the other side of it, the fact is that part of me is that way. There is a part of me that has to depend on fantasy, because if you can't be somewhat of a fantasy person, then you can't write. If you can't believe in dreams, then you can't believe that things will work out, so what are you going to write about? As I had mentioned in my first book, I had hours and hours of unrelated songs, demos, and music of Stevie to listen to, and saw what a talent she has for songwriting from these raw recordings. I had gotten these from Jean Enlow, and have since erased them. In a bio-promotional piece from Atlantic and Modern Records in regards to her Other Side of the Mirror album, Stevie is quoted as saying, "A lot of my friends tend to go back and listen to the demos of my songs before they went on to be records, and they've told me that they like the feel of those. I saw this in her recordings, a quality that is sometimes missed with lots of heavy production. I think her new album, Street Angel, comes the closest to this more pure form of production without so much studio tampering than any in many years, capturing some of this innocent essence." In another interview by Modern and Atlantic Records by Dan Neer and James Fahey, Stevie gave some revealing thoughts on songwriting. "For anybody who really wants to say something, music is a great way to do it because it will get past a lot of bridges you'll never get past if you're speaking. If you're singing, they'll even let you go past the toll bridge without probably even charging you." On the USA Today cable television program, Stevie said to Mary Wallace on June 3rd, 1989, "I'll always still sneak through a little bit of music and a little bit of philosophy and a little bit of teaching somehow in her music." In the next section, I will show how Stevie has much in common with other contemporary mystical songwriters. Section 2, Lady of the Stars. I have made the comparison of Stevie Nicks to some of the other writers of today who are doing mystical and related subject material in their songwriting. In my first book, I spoke of Van Morrison, Donovan, Kate Bush, and others. One person who is exploding on the scene is Tori Amos. With her 2 blockbuster albums, Little Earthquakes and Under the Pink, Tori Amos is proving to be a great new emerging talent and a match for the likes of mystical Kate Bush. Born in North Carolina, the daughter of a Methodist preacher, she grew up listening to Fats Waller, Nat King Cole, Jimi Hendrix, and John Lennon. Atlantic Records says in their bio and press release that she was a gifted child prodigy and could play the piano by the age of 2.5. She was composing musical scores by the age of 4. Because of her obvious gift, she was the center of attention and in great demand as a performer at social gatherings. She stated that, "It took me some time to come to terms with this, but child, I grew to realize that I had some kind of calling. Elvis Presley was known to be obsessed with trying to understand why he was singled out to be so famous with his gift of music. He studied esoteric books, searching for the answer. Tori Amos trained and studied at the Peabody Conservatory in Baltimore before being dismissed for irreconcilable differences. This was between the ages of 5 and 11. The purpose of that school was to train one to be a classical pianist, and you had to learn to read music. They did not want her to play by ear or instinct. Later in her teens, she would draw on some of that training to play Gershwin standards in bars and hotels in Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. It was finally while living in Los Angeles in the mid-'80s that Tori began composing her own songs. These would later become the basis for her album Little Earthquakes. Tori Amos explores the spiritual in her songs, along with a startling approach of candidness and subject material that is unlike almost anything that has been done before. She says in her record company bio that, "I don't see myself as weird, I just see myself as honest. That's just the way I am. I find the truth endlessly interesting." Her candidness in her songs is amazing, reminiscent of John Lennon. In her song God from the Under the Pink album, her lyrics say, "God, sometimes you just don't come through. Do you need a woman to look after you?" Donovan is another mystical songwriter, a real poet of the heart, a real romantic. Although his heyday was in the 60s and early 70s, Donovan continues to write, perform, and record. Most of his albums are now produced in Europe, the latest entitled One Night in Time. There is a new maturity tempered with time and experience in his current music. One Night in Time has some remarkable moods and musical spells that only Donovan can cast. This writer has had the pleasure of corresponding with Donovan and has done artwork for him. He currently lives in Ireland, a country who has passed special tax laws just to bring in artists, poets, and musicians to its land. Then there's Kate Bush. In the November 6, 1993 issue of England's Melody Maker, in an article entitled Heaven's Kate, they describe her by saying, by 1985's Hounds of Love, Bush had earned a reputation as an art rock pioneer whose ability to straddle the charts and the avant-garde was second to none. It is also interesting to see in the same article their comparison to Stevie Nicks. Kate Bush, fueled by visions from literature and mythology. Bush's early music and image exude the same kind of wispy, pre-Raphaelite feminism as Stevie Nicks, another England-obsessed hippie chick. A wild and free femininity and autonomy achieved not through confrontation, but elusiveness. Kate Bush explores the mystical, the pagan, and even shades of Wicca or earth religions in her music. One writer who has touched on this area of Kate is Kevin Can, along with Sean Mays. In their book, Kate Bush, a visual documentary, they expound on this very subject, along with great photos of Kate and her history. Published by England's Omnibus Press, it is a book for every fan of Kate's and a very interesting profile. Kate's latest album at this writing is the incredible Red Shoes. In it, she combines very creative music along with lyrics of biblical references, vivid imagery, and her usual brand of eccentric mysticism. In the same Melody Maker article, as mentioned before, she stated about Red Shoes, musically, I was just trying to get a sense of delirium, of something very circular and hypnotic, but building and building. The writer goes on to say, with its mix of acoustic instruments and synth-like keyboard textures, the Red Shoes immediately made me think Bush was trying to make a link between ancient and modern ideas of dance, pagan rites, and techno-pagan raving. Kate replied by saying, something very similar was on my mind, the idea of trance, delirium, as a way of transcending the normal. Maybe human beings actually need that. Things are very hard for people in this country. Maybe they instinctively need to transcend it all. It's very much that ancient call. In her song Top of the City from the Red Shoes, she has very inspiring lyrics. As she's at the top of the city, she says, I don't know if I'm closer to heaven, but it looks like hell down there. She makes a reference to being put on angels' shoulders on top of the city. I wonder if the song concept could have been inspired by the Bible account of Satan taking Jesus to the top of the city to try to tempt him by saying he would give him all of it if Jesus would worship Satan. In my first book on Stevie Nicks, I made a reference to Stevie's song Goldust Woman and how the writer Jeff Godwin thought that the ending words to the song was an evocation to spirits. In Kate Bush's song Lily, there is an evocation at the beginning of the song that is very strange and interesting, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but it has to be some form of goddess, Wiccan god, or something. The prayer/evocation goes, O thou who givest sustenance to the universe, from whom all things proceed, to whom all things return, unveil to us the face of the true spiritual sun, hidden by a disk of golden light, that we may know the truth and do our whole duty as we journey to thy sacred feet. Then the song goes on about the seeker asking for advice from some spiritual counselor, and the interesting thing is the advice the spiritual guru gives. Child, you must protect yourself. I'll show you how with fire. Then the song goes into another prayer/evocation to angels/spirits, deities, for a plea of power and fire. This, to me, is pure Wicca. It is interesting how Kate is bringing this kind of material to the mainstream through her gift of music. One other song on her Red Shoes album that is exceptional to me is the song Why Should I Love You? It has haunting, beautiful music along with a pop chorus. A beautiful, mystical love song. The credits are quite interesting as well, with it listing Kate and Prince sharing the arrangement. The song has such a lasting mood created in it that it stays in my mind. The gift that Kate Bush has for writing. The lyrics say, have you ever seen a picture of Jesus laughing? Do you think he had a beautiful smile, a smile that healed? Two other songwriters that need to be in this list, before returning to the main subject of Stevie Nicks, are the Irish mystic Van Morrison and newcomer Canadian Lorena Mckennitt. Van Morrison continues to be a prolific songwriter with new albums coming out all the time. He tours constantly and has the reputation of making it his own way in the music industry. There are many past stories how Van came up against the music and record company executives head-to-head on issues and finally won out. He is an uncompromising and eccentric artist. One can even go back to his earliest work with the Irish group he fronted in the 60s, Them, to see examples of his spiritual leanings with songs like Into the Mystic and Here Comes the Night. Most everyone knows of his mega hit Gloria, but many people are not aware of the many songs, albums, and work he has kept producing since then. Astral Weeks was one of his most poetic, creative, and innovative albums, and voted many times in many polls as one of the most original albums of all times. All of his works contain some mystical and spiritual songs, if not the whole album itself devoted to the theme. Beautiful Vision is one of the many albums completely filled with songs of the mystical and spiritual nature. Van Morrison continues a personal style of songwriting and subject material that is an inspiration to many other notable musical figures like Bob Dylan and Bono of U2. Finally, we come to Lorena Mckennitt, probably one of the best-kept secrets in the music world as a new emerging artist of incredible talent and vision. Lorena is from Canada and has produced 5 albums on her own record label. She blends a type of romantic Celtic Irish music with a contemporary feel. Her 1991 album, The Visit, was winner of the Juno Award for Best Roots and Traditional Album. It achieved double platinum sales in Canada and has been released by Warner Music International in over 35 countries worldwide. Her music on her latest album, The Mask and Mirror, reminds me of some of Donovan's soundtrack music he wrote for the film Brother, Sun, Sister Moon, the story of St. Francis of Assisi. It also reminds me of the album that Van Morrison recorded of traditional Irish music with the Chieftains. Very incredible music and style. Songs on the album are The Mystic's Dream, The Bonnie Swans. Then there is her song The Dark Night of the Soul, based on lyrics by the 15th century Spanish mystic John of the Cross. Here again she has adapted his writings and arranged it set to her music. The notes from her album concerning the songs are like a spiritual quest diary and a study of history and roots, trying to find answers to the things of the soul. In her introduction she says, I look back and forth through the window of the 15th century Spain, through the hues of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, and was drawn into a fascinating world, history, religion, cross-cultural fertilization. She then lists some of the people, cultures, religions, and teachings that influence her studies. The Celtic sacred imagery of trees, the Gnostic Gospels, who was God, and what is religion, what spirituality, what was revealed, and what was concealed, and what was mask, and what was mirror. Stevie Nicks has much in common with these other songwriters that I have mentioned. There seems to be a new breed of writers searching for spiritual answers that reflect in their songwriting and also reflecting the mood of our culture today. When I was working with Jean Enlow on research, I would also listen to many hours of taped radio interviews that she had on TV. I would ask Jean questions about the answers Stevie would give to the many questions asked of her. I asked Jean how she would describe Stevie in a few words, and Jean said, very strong, spiritual, and a survivor. My time working with Jean was very interesting. She had such a collection of things. Just about everything you could imagine on Stevie. Rare recordings, bootleg albums of all sorts, candid photographs that I wish I could have used in this book, 3 actual handwritten poems of Stevie's, and one of Stevie's actual hand-done art. Also, a thank you note from Betty Ford from the time Stevie had stayed at her clinic. Sometimes Jean would also order books for Stevie from another New Age bookstore in Pasadena called Alexandria 2 while I was there. Jean and I discussed religion, the teachings, A Course in Miracles which Jean is a firm believer in, and other related things. Jean thought that Stevie's song, Book of Miracles, was really about the teachings/books, A Course in Miracles. Jean seemed to have an obscure conception of God, kind of a God spirit, very New Age. Jean explained to me that Stevie's concern for world affairs and how Stevie helped in many causes like the American Heart Association, especially after her dad had a heart attack. There are references to the work Stevie has done for Greenpeace and other ecological causes. And from her new album, Street Angel, Stevie has a song entitled Jane, about the pioneer Jane Goodall and her work studying chimpanzee culture and how it relates to human life. She is a scientist from England, and Stevie even performed for a benefit concert for Jane Goodall in Texas in October 1991. Jane Goodall's philosophy touches Stevie very deeply, in common with Stevie's desire to see mankind treat others, including the animal population, to respect as we respect the earth we are in care of. Stevie says in the song to Jane, "Such a little girl, such a hard life. You could take a challenge straight between the eyes. In the eyes of the world, you have done so much." Of course, Stevie helped the City of Hope for their help when her good friend, Robin Anderson, died of leukemia. In Arizona Highways magazine, Stevie said, "So to help heart and leukemia research, I give songs away." Well, song royalties, I mean. It's my way of contributing to vital research I am incapable of doing myself. Jean Enlow had said that Stevie is a survivor, and I would totally agree. Through health problems, drug dependency, weight problems, and an area where she could not cross the line on marriage, children, or career, she has survived. Stevie has expressed desires for having her own children so much in the past and could not decide to give up her career for her family. Yet she says, "I definitely want to have 1 or 2 children, and I don't want to wait any further than age 34. This quote was from Teen Magazine in 1977. The only marriage Stevie had was the short one to Kim Anderson, who was the husband of her good friend Robin. Many people thought it was a bad idea on Stevie's behalf, including Stevie's parents, to marry Kim. Most thought the only reason Stevie did it was to help provide a home for Robin's only son, born to Robin and Kim just before Robin's death. The marriage itself was not without intrigue. In Timothy White's Musician magazine article entitled Last Tango's New Beginnings, he wrote in February 1989, Kim Anderson was a member of the Hiding Place Church, whose born-again Christian liturgy emphasized the supernatural and the charismatic. Philip Wagner, the minister who officiated at the January 29, 1983 Anderson-Nicks nuptials, was outspoken in his trepidation concerning the pairing, stating he did not know where Stevie was at with God. Separation papers were filed several months later, the formal divorce coming through in April 1984. Stevie has expressed regrets many times to the press about her sadness of not having chosen marriage and a family over her career. This seems to be a dilemma that Stevie has been unable to resolve and therefore suffer the emotional crisis it does to her. The publication Mirror Woman, January 15, 1992, said, "And yet despite all the trappings of wealth, there is an aura of yearning that surrounds Stevie." Later, in the same article, Stevie is quoted as saying, "I love making people feel comfortable. My mom is just like that, and I'm sure that's where I got it. But the only thing I haven't managed to achieve like her is a lifetime with somebody." Many people do not know the fact that Stevie opted for abortion on a number of occasions. She has made this public in only 2 sources that I know of, and she has expressed the deep regret this has caused her. "I love children, and children love me. It is one of my biggest disappointments that I have not given birth. The pregnancies that had to be terminated because I was in the middle of one of the world's biggest rock groups. It was sheer agony for me to make those decisions." Stevie went on to say how she felt she would be responsible for other people's welfare involved with having the show on the road stopped with Fleetwood Mac due to her leaving to have a baby. She went on to say, But though I might have stopped wrecking other people's lives, in a lot of ways I feel I ruined my own by not going through with my pregnancies. The other source that I have where Stevie talks about her abortions is from Vox magazine, February 1992, the British publication. It is interesting that in the beginning blurb before the article the writer says, bullied by her record company. I wonder if they were referring to her former management, the one that I had problems with. Later in the article, it talks about how she had a dispute about using a song written by John Bon Jovi on her Time Space album. The song was Sometimes It's a Bitch, and Stevie objected to using it for a number of reasons. Stevie says in the article, I know that just me singing that kind of song wasn't going to go over with a lot of my fans, which it hasn't, but I was told by the industry, by management, by the record companies, and by everybody else that if I did not do this, reach this new audience, that my career was simply, finally, completely over. In the Vox article, the writer talks about how Time Space's sleeve notes were full of references to her ex-lovers. The article goes on to say, was there a common thread among her men? They're all very smart and very loving, and they all had a difficult time with my life. For 4 lovers, a crucial test came when she became pregnant and opted for terminations. It's always been a tragedy, but they understood, but they didn't really. The Vox writer said that Stevie finally decided to put her career and her fans before a relationship of permanence with any of the men. He went on to write, but now there is remorse at the havoc her abortions have wreaked on her psyche. To give up 4 babies is to give up a lot that would be here now, so that really bothers me a lot. That really breaks my heart, but they're gone, so... In that article by Timothy White, Last Tango's New Beginnings that I referred to earlier, Stevie is quoted as saying, they say that from tragedy comes great art. Sometimes I think I should go back to being a waitress. Maybe I would enjoy life more. But if I led a perfectly existing life where I didn't try the universe or dare anybody or take any risks, I would never have written all those songs. So, in all of us, there's some great tragedy that has gone on, and that is what we write about. It seems like Stevie has made a move to take back some control over her career by leaving her former management and going with longtime friends and co-workers Glenn Parrish. Her new album, Street Angel, seems to be an indication of this smart move. I consider the album a sparkling production. It's a very tight album for me with no loose, dead spaces. The songwriting is solid. Her one cut, Listen to the Rain, has to me the same dynamic punch as the Rolling Stones' 70s album, It's Only Rock and Roll. Each song is well done to me, and I consider it one of her best solo albums to date. On Greta, it says that she's got her bags packed, and she's off to the valley where the sun meets the sea. You understand that she wants to live by the ocean, and no one is pleased. She gets a house in the mountains. Considering that Stevie has mentioned in interviews how her songs are many times based on her own experiences, it could be that this song is very autobiographical, even though it's supposed to be about the late film star Greta Garbo. In my first book, I referred to a quote about how Stevie went to the beach to live, to find solace after her good friend Robin Anderson died. Her reference to a house in the mountains could be her house on Camelback Mountain in Scottsdale, Arizona, or am I making the mistake of weaving meanings into lyrics that I am not sure of the meanings? This was done, of course, on the great Paul is Dead fiasco during the Beatles' heyday, but again, this is what is so interesting about art and poetry, is that there are so many meanings to different people in a work. Her song Destiny, as I mentioned in the introduction, is an exceptionally good song to me and seems to capture Stevie's worldview very well. The whole album is outstanding. To sum up this writing on Stevie Nicks, I like what she said in a recent interview with the Boston Globe writer Stevie Morse. It's hot here, Phoenix, Arizona, at her home. It's 106 degrees today, but when the sun goes down, I sit outside and it's so beautiful. If you have any problems, you go outside and they disintegrate. I've grown to really depend on my desert sky time. I guess that's why the Indians became very spiritual, because it's very easy to get into a spiritualistic kind of mode here. In another related quote, Stevie had this to say about her Arizona home in Arizona Highways magazine. I was born on this desert, and I'm still a desert baby. Desert is very healing to me, and my Phoenix home is where I go to write songs and let the creative juices flow. There is something about the piano, the view of Camelback Mountain, my home, well, I get there and suddenly the songs begin to happen. You don't stop them when they occur to you, or they are gone forever. As I stated in my introduction, I have written this book a little different than my first one. I have presented many sides and aspects of Stevie from my experience and research, both positive and negative, trying to be objective. I still see Stevie Nicks as a great talent, a gifted poet, survivor, and songwriter. When I was working with Jean Inlow, Jean had offered me her own manuscript of a book that she was working on as well. She offered to let me take it back to Tulsa if I had wanted to use any of her research and writings. Sadly, Jean passed away from her heart condition before seeing the completion of the first book. This book, as the first one,